Donnie Brasco isn't just another crime drama, it's one of the rare Hollywood films directly adapted from the true undercover life of FBI agent Joe Pistone, who spent 6 years inside the Bonanno crime family. These are 18 hidden details you completely missed in Donnie Brasco. Number 18. Donnie Brasco was adapted from the 1988 nonfiction book Donnie Brasco, My Undercover Life in the Mafia by Joe Pistone and Richard Woodley. The project was grounded in actual FBI case files rather than fictional scripts, giving screenwriter Paul Attanasio unprecedented access to operational details. Cast credits at the opening list the real Pistone as primary source material, confirming the authenticity that director Mike Newell insisted upon throughout production. Watch the opening credits and notice how prominently Pistone's name appears, a rarity for true crime adaptations in the 1990s. The book spent weeks on bestseller lists in 1988, making it a hot property in Hollywood. Producer Mark Johnson acquired the rights and championed the project for nearly a decade. Number 17. Casting director Louis DeGiamo, a childhood acquaintance of Joe Pistone from their shared Pennsylvania neighborhood, personally bought the film rights to the memoir in 1989. DeGiamo initiated production by bringing the project to TriStar Pictures, leveraging his industry connections from working on The Godfather Part 3. Opening credits list producers drawn directly from Pistone's personal network, an unusual Hollywood arrangement. Without DeGiamo's emotional investment and financial risk, the story might never have reached the screen, according to interviews with producer Mark Johnson. DeGiamo spent considerable resources securing rights and early development costs. Watch the producer credits roll and notice DeGiamo's prominent placement, acknowledging his role beyond typical casting duties. His personal connection to Pistone gave the production unprecedented access to classified details. Number 16. Stephen Frears was initially set to direct in 1990, but after Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas reshaped mob film expectations that same year, the Donnie Brasco project stalled for nearly 6 years before director Mike Newell took over. Studios worried another Mafia film would feel redundant in Goodfellas' shadow. Director credit roll shows Newell's name after this prolonged development period, during which 3 different scripts were commissioned and rejected by TriStar Pictures. The studio nearly abandoned the project entirely in 1994, before Mandalay Entertainment stepped in with fresh financing, according to Variety reports. Newell, coming off 4 weddings and a funeral success, brought a character-driven approach that distinguished Donnie Brasco from stylized Scorsese violence. The delay actually benefited the production, allowing Newell to emphasize psychological realism. Number 15. Key scenes, including the pivotal bar meeting between characters, were shot on real streets like Mulberry Street in Little Italy, Manhattan. Signage and street layouts match authentic NYC locales where actual Bonanno family operations occurred during the 1970s. Production designer Donald Graham Burt insisted on location shooting rather than studio sets, grounding the film's backdrop in genuine mob territory. Local residents, some with rumored organized crime connections, watched filming with intense interest, according to crew interviews. Cinematographer Peter Sova used natural lighting to capture the gritty texture of these neighborhoods. Watch background details in Little Italy scenes and notice period-accurate storefronts that required minimal set dressing. Filming real locations added authenticity, but also created security concerns for cast and crew throughout the 1996 production schedule in Manhattan. Number 14. Principal photography ran from February to May 1996, capturing a snapshot of New York City before late 1990s urban gentrification transformed lower Manhattan and Brooklyn neighborhoods. Early scenes show 1970s and 1980s set dressing layered over real city architecture that would soon be demolished or renovated. Production designer Donald Graham Burt noted in interviews that finding unchanged locations from Pistone's undercover era was increasingly difficult. The film accidentally documented vanishing neighborhoods, making it a historical record beyond its narrative intentions, according to film historians. Watch exterior shots and notice aging buildings and storefronts that no longer exist. Director Mike Newell deliberately avoided modern intrusions, ordering removal of contemporary signage and technology visible in frames. This temporal authenticity adds documentary quality to the drama. Number 13. Joe Pistone spent extensive time with Johnny Depp before and during filming at various New York locations, helping him nail authentic mob behavior and speech patterns. Depp's close-up facial mannerisms, from eye contact avoidance to subtle posture shifts, directly reflect this intensive coaching from the actual undercover agent. Pistone taught Depp how wise guys hold cigarettes, shake hands, and use silence as intimidation, according to production notes. Depp shadowed Pistone for 2 weeks before cameras rolled, absorbing behavioral details impossible to learn from scripts alone. Watch body language during card game scenes, and notice the economical, watchful movements Pistone demonstrated. Director Mike Newell credited Pistone's involvement as crucial to Depp's understated performance. This authenticity distinguishes Donnie Brasco from more theatrical mob portrayals popular in the 1990s. Number 12. 2012, Joe Pistone has stated in multiple interviews that approximately 85% of the film reflects real events from his 6-year undercover operation, with only 15% dramatized for cinematic effect by screenwriter Paul Attanasio. Scenes depicting trust building, FBI procedural meetings, and mob hierarchies mirror documented memoir accounts Pistone recorded in classified debriefings. Watch the jewelry store sequences and notice how these match Pistone's actual operational methodology described in his book. Director Mike Newell consulted FBI case files to verify timeline accuracy throughout production. The high fidelity to real events was unusual for Hollywood true crime films, which typically invent dramatic confrontations according to film critics. Pistone served as an on-set consultant, correcting dialogue and blocking when scenes strayed from documented reality, ensuring authenticity rarely seen in biographical crime dramas. Number 11. Joe Pistone clarified in DVD commentary that certain scenes were fictional additions by screenwriter Paul Attanasio never documented in the memoir. These domestic tension scenes don't appear in Pistone's original FBI reports or published accounts. Director Mike Newell added them to externalize the psychological toll of undercover work that Pistone experienced internally, according to production interviews. Watch Anne Heche's performance and notice how these invented moments create dramatic stakes absent from the actual case. The confrontation scenes, while fictional, represent emotional truths about the strain on Pistone's real family during his 6-year assignment with the Bonanno family. Pistone accepted these dramatizations as necessary to make internal conflict visible on screen, even though they never literally happened. Paul Attanasio defended these choices in screenwriting forums. Number 10. The portrayal of mob rituals, including card games, introductions through intermediaries, and elaborate respect tests reflects documented Bonanno family customs that Joe Pistone recorded in classified FBI debriefing sessions. Watch poker scenes and notice the precise etiquette around dealing, betting, and conversation that mirror actual Mafia social codes. Production designer Donald Graham Burt consulted FBI transcripts to recreate the visual details of these ceremonies according to behind-the-scenes features. The handshake trust rituals shown throughout the film follow protocols Pistone learned during his undercover work. Director Mike Newell emphasized these procedural details to show how organized crime functions as a parallel society with strict rules. The authenticity of these rituals, confirmed by FBI organized crime experts, distinguishes Donnie Brasco from more sensationalized mob films. Number 9. Joe Pistone and Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero developed a genuine bond over 6 years undercover, a relationship mirrored in the film's emotional core that drives the tragedy. Shared interactions and the mentor-protege framing shown on screen reflect documented exchanges from Pistone's memoir and FBI surveillance recordings. According to Pistone's interviews, betraying Lefty was the operation's most psychologically difficult aspect, creating moral conflict the film accurately portrays. Watch Al Pacino and Johnny Depp's chemistry and notice how their scenes together feel less like acting and more like genuine friendship forming. Director Mike Newell deliberately avoided sentimentalizing this relationship, keeping it grounded in the moral ambiguity of undercover work. Pistone still thinks about Lefty decades later, confirming the lasting impact dramatized in the film's final scenes with Pacino. Number 8. The real Joe Pistone deliberately selected the alias of a jewel thief because that criminal profession allowed him to avoid participating in violence while still gaining Mafia trust and credibility. Watch scenes where the character discusses his backstory and notice how he emphasizes theft expertise over muscle work. This strategic choice appears in FBI operational planning documents that screenwriter Paul Attanasio consulted during script development, according to production notes. Pistone knew that refusing to commit murder would eventually expose him, so he needed a cover that explained his reluctance convincingly. Director Mike Newell emphasized this detail to show the careful calculation behind successful undercover work. The jewel thief identity gave Pistone valuable skills for the mob while maintaining a psychological distance from the violence he witnessed daily throughout his infiltration. Number 7. Contrary to the film's ambiguous final scene that fades to black suggesting execution, Lefty Ruggiero was actually arrested by the FBI before the Bonanno family could kill him for his role in the operation's exposure. Ruggiero later passed from cancer in 1994, not by mob violence as the film implies. Watch the ending carefully and notice how director Mike Newell deliberately leaves the fate unclear, a dramatic choice that contradicts documented history. According to FBI records, Ruggiero was arrested in 1981 and served a reduced sentence after cooperating partially with federal prosecutors. The film's artistic decision to suggest mob execution creates more powerful tragedy but sacrifices historical accuracy. Joe Pistone has stated in interviews that Lefty's actual fate was less cinematically satisfying but more complex than simple revenge. Number 6. The real undercover operation resulted in over 200 indictments and more than 100 convictions of organized crime figures across multiple Mafia families. families, fundamentally disrupting East Coast mob operations. Brief courtroom sequences and trial references in the film reflect documented FBI press releases from 1981 and 1982. According to Department of Justice records, Pistone's testimony helped dismantle significant portions of the Bonanno family hierarchy. Watch the courtroom scenes and notice how they compress years of trials into moments, underplaying the operation's massive legal impact. Director Mike Newell focused on personal relationships rather than procedural aftermath, making these consequences feel secondary to the central friendship. The operation's success revolutionized FBI undercover methodology and remains one of the Bureau's most significant organized crime investigations in history according to law enforcement experts. Number 5. Donnie Brasco was produced on a relatively modest $35 million budget but earned critical and financial success, including an Academy Award nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay for Paul Attanasio. Watch the awards credits and notice the screenplay acknowledgement, unusual for crime dramas competing against bigger studio releases in 1997. The film grossed over $124 million worldwide against its production costs, proving audiences craved authentic mob stories over stylized violence. Director Mike Newell's restrained approach appealed to critics who praised the film's psychological depth according to reviews in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. The film performed especially well in East Coast markets where real mafia history resonated with audiences. The commercial success validated the decision to emphasize character over action, influencing subsequent crime dramas throughout the late 1990s. Number 4. Al Pacino's portrayal is intentionally restrained and tragic, sharply contrasting his earlier flamboyant gangster roles in the Godfather trilogy and Scarface. Watch Pacino's subdued delivery and weary posture throughout Donnie Brasco and notice the absence of his signature explosive intensity. According to director Mike Newell's commentary, Pacino wanted to play a low-level wise guy whose mediocrity defines his tragedy, rejecting offers to make the character more powerful or dramatic. Pacino studied real Bonanno family recordings to capture the mundane reality of street-level mob life, far from Corleone family glamour. This performance demonstrates Pacino's range beyond iconic shouting roles, showing quiet desperation instead. The restrained acting anchors the film's authenticity, making the fate feel inevitable rather than operatic like earlier Pacino mob characters in Brian De Palma films. Number 3. Unlike typical mafia films with clear good versus evil frameworks, Donnie Brasco emphasizes dual loyalty, betrayal, and identity conflict, mirroring Joe Pistone's real psychological struggle during his 6-year undercover assignment. Watch close-ups of faces torn between mob life and family obligations, reflecting documented internal conflicts from Pistone's memoir and FBI psychological evaluations. Mike Newell deliberately avoided heroic framing, showing how undercover work corrodes personal identity rather than strengthening it. According to screenwriter Paul Attanasio's interviews, the moral complexity was central to adapting Pistone's story authentically. The film refuses to celebrate the FBI success, instead showing its devastating personal cost on relationships and mental health. This ambiguity distinguished Donnie Brasco from earlier crime films celebrating law enforcement triumphs without examining psychological consequences, according to film scholars. Number 2. Director Mike Newell focused on gritty realism rather than stylized violence typical of 1990s crime films, showing mundane but tension-filled mob life instead of exaggerated shootouts. Watch day-to-day interaction scenes and notice the emphasis on dialogue and body language over action sequences. According to cinematographer Peter Sova's interviews, Newell deliberately avoided Martin Scorsese's kinetic camera work and Quentin Tarantino's violence aesthetics dominating the era. The film contains relatively little gunplay, with violence occurring suddenly and briefly rather than as extended set pieces. This restraint reflects actual organized crime operations where most time involves waiting, talking, and building relationships. Newell's approach was commercially risky in an action-heavy decade, but ultimately distinguished Donnie Brasco as character study rather than thriller, appealing to audiences seeking authenticity over spectacle. Number 1. Donnie Brasco stands out in the crime genre because it doesn't just depict gangsters, but illustrates the profound cost of undercover work on identity, relationships, and morality, much of which comes from Joe Pistone's lived experience rather than Hollywood invention. Watch the final sequences reflecting the return to normal life and notice how they're tinged with loss rather than triumph. According to film historians, Donnie Brasco influenced subsequent undercover narratives, including The Departed and The Infiltrator, by prioritizing psychological realism over action. The film's success proved audiences would embrace morally complex crime stories without clear heroes or satisfying resolutions. Director Mike Newell's approach legitimized character-driven true crime as commercially viable, expanding the genre beyond glorification or simple condemnation. The film's legacy extends beyond its initial 1997 release. Donnie Brasco remains one of cinema's most authentic mafia films because it's rooted in the real history of of FBI undercover work and friendships that blurred lines between professional duty and human loyalty. The film's commitment to Joe Pistone's actual experience creates lasting impact that transcends typical crime drama. Which hidden detail surprised you most, and what film should we open next?